The Devil from Hell's Kitchen is back, this time on a new streaming service, when Johnnie Torch Reviews Daredevil Born Again. Welcome in, everyone, to another Johnnie Torch Reviews. This one, a long time coming. In fact, I actually tried to record this one last week. Had a little difficulty, technical difficulty, but we're going to bring you the review for Daredevil Born Again, the long-awaited return of Matt Murdock from Hell's Kitchen, previously from Netflix, now on the Diz. And as expected, there's some changes because we are on the Diz and not on Netflix. Some for the better, I might add, and some maybe not so much. Welcome in once again, everyone, to a Johnnie Torch review. Make sure you hit like, share, and subscribe. Do all those fun things before we begin. It's a lovely, warm spring afternoon here, right after Easter. And we are sitting in Torch Tower overlooking the fair metropolis below. And we'll start off with some spoiler-free comments, as I usually do. But this will be a spoiler review once we get into the swing of things. First off, let's do some history. Now, I actually listened to my review of Daredevil Season 3 about 2 weeks ago now, so I can't really recall it verbatim, but I don't even remember that season that well. But I did say in that review that it was my favorite season up to then. And I think it's largely in part because it was a very religious centric storyline. It was basically Matt, you know, as he seems to do frequently in this series, questioning whether he can be, the lawyer during the day and the avenging hero at night, and where's his place in the world and all that. I think that part of my problem with this season, if anything, is it feels like we've gone through that arc like at least 3 times, counting this season. The first season, he's sort of getting his feet wet as a vigilante. Second season, he's in full swing, which was probably the most exciting season. The problem I had with season 2 was the first half was great with Punisher, and then the second half fell flat with Elektra. I didn't really like what they did with Elektra. I mean, perhaps if they had done it on Disney, maybe we would have gotten the actual, Bullseye killing Elektra and sort of doing that whole arc as in the comics. But it kind of fell flat to me because they didn't go that far. They didn't go that route to actually involve Bullseye at that juncture. But the Punisher stuff was all great. Of course, John Barathol returns as the Punisher in Born Again. And of course, as I said, season 3, we kind of had the actual Born Again, not verbatim, but adaptation from the comic. And Matt's mother is involved. Of course, she a nun. And, it's very interesting that, like, he's always on the comeback trail, it seems like, Matt. He's never really at full strength. And we don't really start this season any different. So full disclosure, again, I was not a huge fan of the Netflix Daredevil show for several reasons, which I'll go over with right now. But I wasn't crazy about the first season with the black sweat togs that Daredevil was in. I know that was technically from the comics because I believe I think that they were trying to sell it even back then as not a colorful superhero project, but something that the movies could make, possibly on the cheap. And I think actually that kind of aesthetic did go with the Trial of the Incredible Hulk, the first Daredevil appearance uh, on television with Rex Smith playing Daredevil. They did have a very like sort of mostly just like tights, acrobatic tights or something that they used for him. So again, this is kind of par for the course, but again, I was disappointed that we had to wait till the end of the season for him to get the costume. I was disappointed we only got the briefest of glimpses of his radar sense, which in Born Again they don't really give us the full radar sense yet, I suppose, but they do sort of make an effort to sort of tweak a little bit what we see Matt experiencing when he's kind of using his hearing and sense of touch and this and that, which I think was kind of lacking in Netflix. And of course, most importantly, we didn't really get a lot of daring do. We didn't get a lot of high flying acrobatics. Again, you can't really blame Netflix for not having the budget to do those things. But now on the Diz, you can show, and of course, some of it is CGI, but you can show Daredevil swinging on rooftops with a billy club and jumping. And we've seen a lot of this also when they officially folded Daredevil into the MCU with She-Hulk, which for all the faults that that show had, did have some really exciting stuff with Daredevil in the one episode that he was in, some great action, and it excited me and it whet my appetite for what they could do in his own show. Again, Echo, there was like one episode where he was in it doing again some stellar fight scene. And of course, Vincent D'Onofrio was in Hawkeye and Echo as the Kingpin previously to this. And of course, Matt Murdock shows up in Spider-Man No Way Home. So they've been sort of doing the slow rollout here for these characters and folding them into the universe. Now, again, I felt that as much as fanboys seemed to obsess with the greatness of the show, there was this padded feeling to it that also put me off because they couldn't do too many acrobatics and because they couldn't really do too much in terms of colorful superhero concepts. They had to keep it street level and they had to do this and they had to do that. And again, I reject the grim and grittiness of superheroes. I don't like putting that into superhero stuff. That's why you got to have Daredevil in the red costume. You've got to have him, with the acrobatics and everything. You can't just water it down. And I felt that was what was the case was. Now there was some good storytelling. There was an exceptional cast, and they all come back for the most part here. We'll get into that in a second. But you really had a watered down scenario there. I always take it back to when Wilson Fisk is having some big meeting with some old lady from the Asian gang, and he's talking to her in Mandarin for 10 minutes. And it felt at that time like that was 10 minutes of my life I was never going to get back. And I know your boy Zach, who is sort of running afoul of his fans now. But he even pointed out that basically there were subplots that were like so non-essential as to be painful, such as in his case he was talking about Karen going to a furniture auction that took up a large portion of time. I can't even remember that. I barely remember that. But that's what it is. A lot of these episodes were not memorable to me, and I really have no desire to revisit them because what really you could do is just watch every third episode and you'll get the most important parts of the show. It really is padded where there'll be the first episode, then there's two episodes where not much of anything happens, then there'll be an episode where there's the big fight, there's the showdown with someone, then there's like two more episodes of Matt recuperating, and then there's another episode where kind of ties the plot together. And this is what goes on in the show, and I don't really understand the fanboy enthusiasm for it because really you're not seeing Daredevil at his best, and you're not really getting a punchy, well-paced experience in the show. I always said, really, if you took the second season and you took the first four episodes, which was the introduction of Punisher, and you made that a movie, you'd probably have to edit it down a little bit. It would probably be maybe a 3-hour movie or a 2.5-hour movie if you kind of edit it down. You'd probably have the best Daredevil media of all time. But unfortunately, you know, you have to pad things out, I guess, a bit for a series, and I don't think Netflix really did that well. It felt like there was half-hour conversations in a hour episode. Something else would happen. Then, like every third episode, there'd be an action-oriented scene that was, the high point for that arc. So again, I'm going into this not particularly fond of what was going on with the Netflix Daredevil. So my approach to this is going to be different than your average fanboy. Now, I know the usual suspects, of course, were pooing this, and they originally sent out sort of feelers to, because that's what you do now with these YouTube crackheads. They send out a feeler and they're like, oh, I don't know if this is going to be good. I can't come out against it because if I come out against it, and it turns out to be good, people are going to laugh at me and say, oh, he's, being a contrarian. But at the same time, they can't fully endorse something because their bread and butter has always been to say everything's terrible. Everything's terrible. Nothing's any good anymore. Nothing's worth watching. And they'll throw their support behind certain well-selected projects, but it can't be anything revolving around Disney or any kind of project where that's their cash cow. Because we just went through with Snow White. That was a feast for them because everybody knew how terrible that film was going to be. And so when they had an actual terrible thing, you think that's what they would focus on, but it has to be everything. There's no nuance with their reviews. Everything has got to be terrible at the end of it all. Everything is, well, they hate you. And I understand these channels became prominent when woke was at its height, and it was, and maybe in some case still is, the function of them to sort of spit in your face. But I think that at this point, the woke is nearly over. Now, I say nearly because a lot of these projects were in the pipeline 2 or 3 years ago when woke was at its heyday. So we can't say, oh, okay, that the woke is completely gone from us. But the thing is that I don't think that stuff is being at the forefront anymore. And we're going to look into that in just a second because I can see how this show was retooled, I think, in some cases to reflect that. All right. So, with some of that history out of the way now, let me just say to give you a non spoiler rating, I would say I'm pretty sure, I don't remember, I'm pretty sure I gave all the Netflix Daredevil seasons kind of a four, maybe a 3.5 or a four. This is really no different because the mistakes that it makes are different than the Netflix mistakes. It's more action oriented in some cases. The action scenes I think are legitimately better, but there is a lot of slowness of getting to the point. This show or this season is, because some of you can look at it as a season four. I kind of prefer to think of it as a season four and not just its own thing. But this season is basically a lengthy preamble for what this show should have always been for the last four seasons. By the time we get to the end of this season, this is Daredevil as I always wanted to see him. And, it takes so long to get there because they had to retool this. And you can tell they retooled it in some cases. We'll get into that in a moment too. But so it was never going to be a 5-star show coming in like that, where it had to be retooled and it had to be rejected because, again, some history. When they had originally started this about, I don't know, 3 years ago, they started shooting this. There was a writer strike and they had delivered, I think, 4 or 5 episodes. And Kevin Feige took a look at it and said, nah, this is not working. And again, a lot of the cast was saying the same thing. Charlie Cox, Vincent D'Onofrio, they were not satisfied with the scripts. And you had John Barenthal, who didn't want to be involved. He flat out told them, no, this is not the way I want to see the Punisher portrayed. And he's very, protective of that role, and he's going to make sure it's done right. So they had to make do with what they had. Now, some people would say maybe they should just scrap it scrap the whole thing, but they did put a lot of work into already having the structure of the 4 episodes or whatever that they had. I can see them not wanting to just scrap it and to try to make use of something that they had already paid for and already put a lot of work into. Um, was that the best idea? Maybe, maybe not. I think that you have to give credit to the showrunners who did yeoman service actually to make this fit together in a way that doesn't feel completely ridiculous. Um, if you're being fair with this show, you will give credit that they at least tried to make it as palatable as possible when it probably was going to be a disaster. And again, now we'll get into the full specifics of this, but quite honestly, I think you have to give them credit where credit is due. All right, so again, I'll give this I think a four stars out of 5. I will probably I don't know. I don't want to say an A minus. It's bordering on an A minus, maybe a B plus. But again, it's pretty strong. I think it's pretty solid, and I think you have to be able to appreciate that. If you're anywhere at all a fan of the Daredevil. All right, so we'll get into some of the spoiler stuff right now. Now, one of the things they had done was and I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but Alet Zerur, who played Vanessa Fisk, who was a very big and important part of the show. For some reason, they recast her, and so when they brought, when they started retooling the whole show, they brought her back, which was, again, it was a stupid thing to take her out to begin with, which was an important move, and so a lot of that was reshot as well. So a lot of these episodes were having fragments that were reshot, and that was like whenever you see her in the episodes, that's one of the reshoots. Now, as we enter the show, I'm not going to do episode by episode so much, but we'll try to hit some of these beats so that we got some overall feeling of you know what the show was about here. As we open the show, they brought back Deborah Ann Wall and Eldon Henson as Karen Page and Foggy Nelson. Originally, these characters were going to already be dead, I think. I don't know if I don't remember if that was like during the blip or something, or how they were going to explain it. But the idea was going to be that they were already dead, and that Disney Marvel moved in this new DEI cast of new co-workers for Matt, including Cherry, I think his name is, who is like a retired detective, and Kristen. I've got the cast list here. I'm trying to recall their names, but they are so bland and uninteresting. That's what I mean about how if they didn't retool this show, that's what we would have to work with for the whole season. Now, they decrease in interest and importance as the show goes on, but basically that was going to be our Karen and Foggy surrogates that were going to just carry on through the rest of the show. Now, the show I think was originally conceived to be a 22 or 20 episode series, and with the retooling, they decided to cut it in half and go back to formula, so to speak, to use a well-known quote. And that's why season 2 is already being shot right now, but they took that chance to veer it into a different direction by stopping there, because this season feels very incomplete, because it was basically working with a framework that they needed to adhere to, but they desperately were trying to break out of. So anyway, the worst kept secret of the show was that Foggy was going to be killed. He gets killed by Bullseye in the beginning of the first episode, and Matt fights Bullseye. Bullseye, he throws him off the roof, and it's funny because he's got an adamantium laced spine or something. They even showed that at the end of the last season, and I don't think that would be enough to save him from doing a face plant on the sidewalk from the roof of a building. But yeah, they brought back Bullseye, which is what I was looking forward to. That's the only reason why I really wanted there to be a season 4, because the guy that plays him, Bullseye, he is so good. Just giving looks. Um, Wilson Bethel, he is really good in this role, and it's like you only see his eyes, but he's got those bullseye eyes. They should give him the actual mask. I don't know what they're afraid of when it comes to Bullseye. Even if they don't want to give him the white gloves and the white boots or whatever, they got to give him the insignia on the mask, and they got to show his face a little more. But he really brings a lot to this, and they used him a lot in season 3 as the fake Daredevil, the imposter. And so a lot of people are wondering if Foggy will return next season because apparently in the comics, and again, I haven't read the most recent comics. I honestly haven't touched the newer stuff in like 20 years now at this point. But Foggy faked his own death and he came back. And apparently, this is something that they think is going to happen in the show, that he faked his death and that somehow when Matt was hearing his heart stop, it wasn't for real. I'm not sure exactly how they got out of that in the comics, but I'm hoping that to be the case because I really want to see Foggy back with Matt. I want to see Karen back more. Of course, Karen leaves the show for a long period because she wasn't in the episodes that they were in. And they mention a couple of times during the season how he misses Foggy, misses Karen. And he takes up with another lady, another attractive lady, Heather Glenn, who was in the comics. I think she was originally in the early Frank Miller run. I'm not sure if that was even before he started writing it. He was just drawing it. But she was like the daughter of a client that Matt had. And I think she was, I think the Gladiator was obsessed with her or something. We get a little something like that here with Muse. And I think in the comics she ended up committing suicide. But Miller took that into a very dark place. And that's why I was never too crazy about Netflix and even this show somehow going to some dark places, but it kind of is what it is, I guess. But so Matt takes up with Heather, and he even says at one point, which I thought was like glaringly obvious, that the audience itself feels this way. But he said, "It feels like my life is fake." And it does feel like that in the show at some point. It feels like they're trying to make him something that he's not. And I can feel this with Spider-Man. It's like Disney Spider-Man. That's the way I've always described it. Tom Holland Spider-Man. Tom Holland is fine. He's a good actor. I like him as Peter Parker, but you are taking all the props away from Spider-Man. He doesn't have Mary Jane. He doesn't have Harry Osborn. He doesn't have Uncle Ben as that catalyst to keep going on. He has a completely different Aunt May. And so when you take Daredevil from the Netflix show here to Disney and you say, well, we're going to take away Karen, we're going to take away Foggy, we're going to give him Cherry and Skeeter, whatever her name was. And, it feels like it's a fake. It doesn't feel like real Daredevil. It feels like you took Daredevil as a character, put him in a whole new show. It doesn't feel right. And so I felt like that was very brave of them to admit that in dialogue in the show. So again, let's talk a little bit about some of the earlier episodes. Hector Ayala, the White Tiger, is a character, and I was really happy with what they did with him and angry at the same time. Now, we really didn't get to see White Tiger in action. And given that Daredevil was not going to suit up until like the end of the season, because again, he fought Bullseye and Bullseye goes to jail, but he sort of forgoes the costume from here on and decides not to do, again, it feels like we've been through this so many times, but he's going to give up the costume. He's just going to be a lawyer. So he takes the case of Hector Ayala, who is the White Tiger. We never get to see the White Tiger in action, and seeing as how Daredevil wasn't in the suit, it would have been great to have an episode or two showing him defending the city, especially in the stead of Daredevil. And maybe this would also make more sense for why Matt decides he doesn't want to be Daredevil for a while, because again, since we are in the MCU now, well, technically in Netflix, you still have the Defenders. I mean, you still have them running around New York, but we've also got Spider-Man and White Tiger. So if Matt decided that he didn't want to be the vigilante anymore, it would have made sense to have him voice these things and say that, the White Tiger can handle it and this and that. The White Tiger gets in trouble in his civilian identity for trying to stop some corrupt cops from shaking down somebody. And he gets put on trial, and this is sort of Matt's big lawyer case for the season, which I guess he always gets one. And I'm not really a big fan of lawyer dramas, and so this is always like a groaner to me when I have to sit through this stuff. But I mean, it was well done. So I mean, just because it's not my cup of tea when they start doing this, it's fine. It's the same thing with doctors. I mean, if I don't really like the doctor shows, and if they did a Doctor Strange TV show where he was just in surgery all the time or something, I probably would get sick of it too. But so he gets White Tiger off, and again, it's fully in the MCU. So he outs the White Tiger as having a mystical amulet and everything, and that's one of the great things about, like I've said, that some of the things were better here is that they can focus on the fantastical. They don't pretend like, well, how does the White Tiger get his powers? Well, he trained really hard. No, he's got a magic amulet, and so they're not afraid to say he's got a magic amulet. And the thing that was so aggravating, though, is that we didn't see him in action, and he gets shot point blank and killed and completely taken out of the show. And while I understand what they're doing it for, I think they really want to put the niece, who in the comics there was, I think, his daughter. I don't know if it was his niece or his daughter. I think it was his daughter in the comics, took on the mantle of the White Tiger after he passed on or retired or something. And they have the niece in the show, which is also very good because I do like that they're going to set that up. But you know, it kind of feels like we really didn't get to see the White Tiger in the MCU in action, and that's kind of disappointing. They should have gave him a chance to strut his stuff. So next we've got the Muse segment. Let's talk about Muse for a minute there. He was sort of heralded as the big bad this season. They don't really do that much with him. I really liked what they did with him, though, the little that they did. Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm not a big fan. I haven't read the Daredevil comics, so I really don't know anything about Muse. Apparently, he has powers more than just being a psychopath serial killer, which he is in the show. Hunter Doohan, I guess is his name. Very good. I liked him. He shows up at Heather's for a book signing, and then you don't see him again until she's a therapist, by the way, and he's at a session, and then he sort of just decides to kill her. And this sort of didn't sit well with a lot of fans and viewers because they're like, well, and I felt like, well, I understand that. I think if anything, I would have probably, if I had been doing the show, probably inserted one more appearance of Muse in his civilian identity, just sort of get this idea out. But if this was on Netflix, this would have been about 4 episodes. We would have heard his entire life story. We would have seen it 3 or 4 times, and we did that last time with Bullseye. So I feel like this is the preferred way. I don't want to see long flashbacks about his childhood. I don't want to see long discussions about why he's evil. He basically explained himself in, 15 sentences. His parents made him take jujitsu or something and taekwondo, and so he's a pretty good fighter, and he just wants to be an artist and people don't understand. Okay. But again, Muse comes off as sort of like a more spiffy looking Victor Zsasz. Now, Victor Zsasz is a Batman villain in the 90s when they were doing the same thing and they were trying to downplay the colorful characters, and we're just going to have a serial killer. And the most glamorous thing about him, the reason why he survived when all the other serial killers in Gotham from the 90s didn't, is because of the scar tally, that he puts scars on him every time he kills somebody so that he has a complete body covered full of scars. And I feel like that's kind of the same thing with Muse. He's just a bit spiffier dressed. He's got like the white sweatshirt or whatever. He's got the overalls, and he's got a dorky little beanie on his head, and a mask, like a slicker type mask. It's just like, I don't really need him to come back. You know what I mean? I think writing him out when they did, as they did, after the short part of time that we got to know him, was fine. I really don't need him back. But he's trying to kill Glenn, Heather Glenn, and Daredevil comes in, saves the day again, and he originally tries to kill Hector's niece, and that was a really good fight scene there. That was a really good fight scene in that lair, that scary looking lair. And of course, his gimmick is he drains the blood of his victims to make murals. So again, it's different, but it's not anything more than villain of the week. And if they wanted to do like a mini Muse arc, that's fine. But I can't see carrying him on for another season, much less for the whole season this year. So again, he saves Heather in the office, which is a pretty good fight scene there in the office. People are complaining about it, but I mean, it's a small office. What are you going to do, And Heather actually shoots Muse and kills him. And it makes for an interesting thing because Heather is not a fan of the vigilantes. She doesn't like vigilantes. She even says something like, they're cowards, are wearing masks and stuff. And, I was the one that saved myself. Daredevil didn't do it. It's interesting. Now, the reason why I like Heather as a character, and to be honest with you, I was losing my patience with her for a while because she is basically like, just the Karen surrogate. They're just dime store Karen that they want to put in. And again, if they didn't bring Karen back, they probably would have just had all the storylines hinge around her. But she did come off as the typical superhero girlfriend. And I haven't seen that in so long. It was so refreshing. Because I think the last time we seen that was like Mary Jane. And fans, for some reason, audience members, I should say, had a bad reaction to Mary Jane in the Raimi films because, it's too authentic. It's too close to home because as Mary Jane was is the same way as Heather is here. She's like, why are you always cutting out on me? Why am I not that important to you? You don't tell me what you're doing and you're going off and I don't hear from you again. And I got stuff going on that's important to me. Don't you care? And these are like important human questions, but a lot of the audience is like, oh, she's whining. I don't want to hear that. And then, why is she complaining for? She's a superhero. She doesn't know he's a superhero. And she don't even like superheroes. If she knew he was a superhero, he'd probably lose her. So, I mean, these are the kind of things that superheroes had to deal with up until like the year 2000, when all of a sudden we decided, oh, we can't have secret identities. Everybody's got to know who everybody is. And, the girlfriend finds out in the first meeting that her boyfriend's a superhero. But this was something I think that they tapped into the original concept of the superhero girlfriend. And so I really appreciated it by the end of the show, what they had done with her. Now, let's talk a little bit about Fisk. We haven't really got into that yet, so we'll get into that before we get into the Punisher. They wait a long time before they let us know, but they explain that Nadeem, who was in the season previous, I guess they couldn't tie Kingpin to Nadeem's death or whatever, so he got out of prison. They really don't make a big deal out of that, but whatever it is. Vanessa ends up hiring Bullseye to take out Foggy, and Matt finally finds this all out. And so Fisk is running for mayor. Now, again, before let's broach this subject right here. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, well, they're doing this because they're trying to take a shot at Trump." Fisk is a controversial figure in New York. He becomes a mayor. Everybody likes what he's doing because he's like saying the right things, and they don't really know what he's about. And well, he's just starts ruling New York with an iron fist. And so they're trying to, compare that to Trump. Now, I think if that was the original intent, I think they watered it down in the reshoots. Because to be honest with you, it didn't seem anything to me like they were saying anything about Trump. It reminded me, honestly, of how during the pandemic, the governors, particularly the Democratic governors, ruled with an iron hand. And, the whole concept of we're doing this for your good. You have no say. Shut up and do as we say. And that is really what I think of with Kingpin being mayor in this subplot. It seems like he's doing that playbook of, well, the vigilantes are out there and we're doing a anti-vigilante task force, and you're gonna just obey them even though they're not officially police. They're not actually cops. You're gonna do what they say, or they're gonna, drop you in a body bag at the end of the night. And there's martial law, there's curfews, there's all this stuff. And to me, I'm thinking, yeah, that's kind of what they wanted for us during the pandemic. It was, you weren't supposed to go out after a certain time. You couldn't have too many people in one place. You couldn't go anywhere without a mask, God forbid. And that kind of feels like what they're playing to. It doesn't feel to me like they're doing anything other than that. And of course, you have the police taking the emblem of the Punisher. Now, this is something I guess has happened in real life too, where police have sort of adopted the Punisher symbol. And I don't think they mean anything bad by it. I don't really think it's a good idea if you're a cop to sort of portray yourself as the Punisher, because you know he has lethal justice. I don't think you want to ever say you're dispensing lethal justice as a policeman. But I guess there was supposed to be some kind of real world connotations there, and eventually the police in this are corrupt and they're working for Fisk, and they all identify themselves by wearing the Punisher symbol. But again, we'll get back to the Punisher in a second. I want to finish this Kingpin arc. So he gets into office and he basically tells Matt at the beginning, "Look, if you start up doing the vigilante stuff again, I will put you down quickly and completely." And that one of my favorite things. I'm always a sucker for the good guy and the bad guy having it out, just in conversation. I love those kind of scenes, and this was a great scene. And Matt is like, "Well, yeah, but if you cross the line too and you step out of line, I'm coming after you too." And it's kind of there's that sort of give and take there that was really fun to watch. So again, he's comes back together with Vanessa. Now, this is the thing I wasn't too crazy about. This is how he meets Heather, where she is sort of their therapist. And there's problems between Kingpin and his wife because apparently while he was sort of, I don't know exactly what happened. He was on the run or something when he was having those problems with the cops, and she took up with a guy named Adam. Now, I honestly don't think in my heart of hearts that Kingpin would allow a guy that cheated on his wife to breathe oxygen more than 15 minutes if possible. And that was only because he was killing him in the slowest way he possibly could. But in this case, he sort of wants to get her back and wants to earn her affection again. And so ultimately, they say that Adam is out of the picture, but he's really in a prison cell underneath Fisk's mansion or whatever. And he's eating his filet mignon every night. And while the other guy is like the man in the iron mask, so to speak, he's sort of like just in this dungeon screaming and half crazed. And he goes and beats on him every so often and gives him a chance to get away if he could beat him. But of course, you can't beat the Kingpin. We'll talk about more about that in a second. But I thought that storyline was probably unnecessary, but I could see what they were going for, and they were trying to give Fisk and Vanessa a little something more to do other than just run the empire together, because Fisk is trying to keep his hands clean, and she's sort of doing the underhanded stuff now in Lady Macbeth fashion. She's running the underworld, and she's like sort of telling him, you really need to be doing this. I'm doing all the underhanded stuff, and you're still doing mayoral stuff. And he's like, he's trying to be legit in a sense, but it's not really made for him to do that with his darker nature. So again, we get to the end where he's got a let's talk about Daniel Blake. This was one of my favorite characters, and BB Urich. We got to get to them before we close out the show here. But BB Urich, I really don't know what they were going to do with her. I think, again, this was a character that they were going to use, very prominently before the retooling. I think originally she was going to be this big character, and they sort of retooled it that she's like just in the shadows doing stuff that may or may not have large impact in the future should they decide to really do something with her. And she's like a friend of Daniel, which is what's his name, Michael Gandolfini, the son of the Sopranos guy, and he's good. I really like him in this show. And so she's like well, I don't want to say a cub reporter, but whatever they call, like, she's got her own podcast or something, and she's BB Urich and talking to all the people, and it's sort of a way, it's sort of a way to get the man on the street view, and we have like a sentimental attachment for her through Ben Urich, who of course was killed by Kingpin. Now, I think they could go two ways with this character. I think what's probably the best way to do it is to have him kill her too. I am not really a bloodthirsty a guy, honestly, but I kind of feel like it would be sort of poetic if she gets in over her head and he ends up killing her. Because I don't think this character is in the comics, and I don't think this character is ultimately necessary. But again, it's sort of like a DEI hire thing. It was like, well, we got to have a Urich in here, don't we? Well, no, not really. They killed him way too early, in the show, to be honest with you. It's the same thing with like Father Mulhany or whatever his name was. They killed him in the third season, and then people started complaining, well, they don't have as many religious themes in this. Well, actually, they do, but it was much more upfront and in your face when Matt actually had a priest that he could talk to. But I don't feel like they've really minimalized his Catholicism in this. There was one episode alone where he was opening the show praying and closing the show praying. Matt was, and I feel like it's there. They show him like passing a church, but he kind of like he like doesn't want to go in. And I think that's something that's what you call like an arc, where I think he is still having faith, but it's it's being tested still. It's being tried the way it has been for like the past 3 seasons. That's why I kind of wish they'd get past that at this point. Before we get into the other stuff, I do want to also well, the other way, I'm getting all over the place, but the other way they could do it is have BB Urich be the one to sort of expose Fisk when his mayoral stuff all starts crashing down on him. Although I don't suppose it really matters, because I don't think once Fisk's agenda or whatever comes out, you're really not going to need anyone beyond Daredevil finding this out to make it important. I mean, when you see the plan here is something like, I'm not sure exactly what it is. It's something out of like Max Schreck from Batman Returns, where Fisk is sort of siphoning off energy from Red Hook or something. It's sort of the MacGuffin of why he wants to be mayor and how he's trying to accomplish stuff. But again, Daniel, we'll get to that before I go into any further into that. But a lot of people are saying that he's sort of like, again, I think what the original intention here is, he's sort of like the young voter that idol worships the guy in office, and he wants to do everything he can for him, and he wants to you know basically make sure he stays on top. He wants Fisk to stay on top for as long as humanly possible. But the thing is, a lot of people are saying he's the one that's going to be the fall guy for Fisk. He's going to take the fall, and he is going to suffer for all of what Fisk is doing. I don't think that's the case. I think he is going to turn out to be the Rose. Now, there's a comic book character named the Rose who was actually the son of Kingpin and Vanessa, and he wore a mask and nobody knew who he was, and he was like a bitter rival of the Kingpin, trying to take over his rackets and you know become the top dog in New York. But seeing as how in this case we don't have uh Vanessa and Fisk having children, I think what's going to happen is Fisk is going to sort of adopt what's his name, Daniel, and sort of make him his heir. Now, I think we saw seeds of this with Echo, where Fisk was sort of grooming Echo to be his right hand, and he kind of thought she was going to be the one to take over from. I think that's going to play into this with Daniel. I think he's going to think that Daniel's the heir to the throne, prepare him, make him the right hand man. And then at some point, Danny's going to turn on him and he's going to betray him and he's going to take everything. And, you're not going to think because it's this goofy kid, but he's going to end up being the guy that gets Fisk laid low. All right. So also wanted to mention quickly here, I knew this was going to be like an hour episode because I'm just so verbose on all these things. But there was the bottle episode, the episode in the bank. I wanted to make sure I touched on that. I thought that was a great episode. The only thing is this just ties into the whole problem of it took so long to get Matt to become the Daredevil. Now, he sort of everything had to build up on him. First, he had the impetus of the White Tiger dying. There's no longer a vigilante presence in New York that's helping the people. He should become Daredevil. Well, he doesn't. Then there's the lawyer scene. There was another one though I thought it was very interesting where it was the guy that stole the caramel corn, and Matt is like, well, you're multiple offender for thievery and stuff. You're probably going to jail for whatever it was, 90 days or something. And he's like, give me probation. And it's like Matt is like losing his faith in the system. That's why I thought that was an important a little subplot for like one episode. Because like the guy said, I mean, the letter of the law is what everybody is always clinging to. But I mean, it's gonna cost them more to put him in jail for a month or whatever than to just let him have a slap on the wrist and say, all right, you stole a couple of boxes of caramel corn. You know what I mean? It's, again, justice is not always the most logical, in other words. So that was like another interesting development on the path. Then he like meets up with some butthead guy that is he wants him to take his case because I guess he's like, I don't know, he was a teacher and he was like shaking down other teachers for money or something. I don't know. And Matt was like, I'm not gonna, defend this guy. He's a jerk, you know what I mean? And so it's kind of like with all the buildups, and of course, White Tiger's niece was like laying some guilt on him about why can't you stop these things? And he's like, basically, I'm a lawyer. I can't, you know, do these kind of things as a lawyer. And so we waited that long for the buildup. And so part of that buildup was also at this bottle episode where Matt like foils a bank robbery. Now, this is one of the things I always liked is that you always want to see like a bank robbery in a superhero movie or a superhero TV show because it's like that was one of the things that they always did was foil a bank robbery, and we don't really ever see them. Well, the problem with this is again, you would think Matt would get in costume, come in, and fight the bad guys and save the day and whatever, but it turns into this like you know he's sort of working himself in to the situation where he can take the bad guys out and do it in such a way where he's not exposing himself, but at the same time, nobody else is getting in danger. Where if he just jumps in and fights everybody, who knows what'll happen. So I found it a fascinating episode, but again, it's part of the problem with this show. It's we don't tune in to see Matt Murdock, blind lawyer with acrobatics and stuff. We tune in to see Daredevil, and they waited so long to introduce Daredevil. It reminds me of like Iron Man 3 or The Winter Soldier, where there's long portions where the hero is not in costume. And that's what this season felt like. It was just too many long portions without him in costume. And I think that would have helped. All right, so let's get to the ending here of the show where Punisher comes back in, Karen comes back in. Matt has saved Kingpin's life at the black and white ball. A lot of these things seem to me to go back to the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie, which I liked a lot, by the way. That's still one of my top 10 favorite superhero movies. It's probably down around 9 now or something. And he saves Fisk's life from getting shot by Bullseye. And Bullseye escapes from prison in the manner you expect him to. And he wants revenge. And again, he's basically earlier in the episode begging Matt to protect him because he doesn't think he's gonna survive in jail. So he's got to get out. And of course, Matt isn't gonna help him because he killed Foggy. So he saves Fisk's life. And again, this is an interesting thing because they have this thing like where Bullseye tells him, you're the guy that's gonna save the guy that's the most evil. You know what I mean? And it sort of happens. He could have just let him kill the Kingpin. But Matt is, again, too altruistic for that, for one thing. But for another thing, I think this leads to a very interesting idea where Fisk still tries to kill Matt. He uses Buck, which is his new Wesley, to try to kill him in the hospital. But it's like if he were to expose Matt as Daredevil, because he's got the whole anti-vigilante task force going, he would look like the biggest idiot because Matt is the one that saved his life. Because that's why I always hate when they have the bad guy know who the good guy's identity is, because how do you logically make that work? How do you say, I know he's a superhero, but I'm not going to tell anybody because, then that doesn't really hold up. But I guess in this case, maybe that works because how are you going to say, well, Daredevil's a dangerous vigilante and Matt Murdock is he, when he practically got shot in the chest to save your life? So he got to go about killing Matt in a much more subtle way. Meanwhile, like I said, Punisher, we get the introduction to him in the middle of the season. He doesn't want to be bothered with anything. He's sort of like, I don't know what he's going through, but he's sort of like, knowing that there's like Fisk's task force out there and everything, you think he'd be more interested in it, but he doesn't until Karen calls him in. Now they're throwing the Karen Frank shippers a bone in this episode, really big, because it's implied that he only comes back to help Matt because of Karen. And of course, they've had this subtle thing going, well, in a big way, actually, that, fans have kind of want to see them get together. Now, I say no, don't do that to Karen. Frank is unstable. He may be well-intentioned in a way, but I mean, he's way too unstable. Now, I know Karen's got her own, she's got her own skeletons in the closet, and if you back her against a wall and put a gun in her hand, she's going to do some damage. Let's put it that way. But again, I don't really see her as being an equal with Frank on that level. So we get to see him, Matt, sort of witnessing this, because I don't think he's witnessed this before, where there's this palpable chemistry between Frank and Karen. And of course, this is something else that I like, that we were talking about Heather with the girlfriend role, which could be probably leading to a rectangle situation, but we got a triangle here. Since when do we have that in a superhero show? These are some old school things that they brought to the show that we haven't seen in so long, let alone on Netflix. We haven't seen this at all since, heaven knows when. And so you could feel the chemistry between Matt and Karen, but then again, there's the chemistry between Frank and Karen, and Karen really has got feelings for both of them, really. So which way is she going to go? And I love it. I love that. I hope they really lean into that next season. So Frank and Matt, they end up taking out like 90% of the task force in Matt's apartment. And it's funny because, Frank just, I don't know how Matt really can tolerate Frank, to be honest with you, because Frank just lays waste to pretty much everybody. He kills like probably 90% of the people in that room. And when there was like one guy that was still moaning in pain, he literally just shoots him in front of Matt. Matt's like, don't kill this guy. Don't kill this guy. Okay, well, I'll kill this guy. It's like, you think Matt would like, he's like, what's wrong with you? He's like, just get away from him, Matt. He's crazy. But it makes for a good, I really love their rapport. You know what I mean? Seeing these two guys together, working together when it's so crazy that they even be in the same room. It's a lot of fun. And we got the Kingpin. First, let's get this out of the way, where Punisher ends up going after the vigilante task force by himself. Karen and Matt go off to try to investigate Foggy's death, and we still don't know if he's alive by the end of this, by the way. And so Frank ends up taking out a bunch of guys, a bunch of anti-vigilante guys, and he ends up being captured. And they actually want him to work with them. They like admire him so much. Again, this is sort of a story again of like idol worship. They just worship him as an idol. And he's like, "You guys are crazy. You guys are nuts. He's nothing like me. I wouldn't do anything like that. If my life depended on it." So they end up putting Frank in the prison. It's a different prison under the Kingpin's ward or wherever. But and this is interesting because they got swordsmen. They got some of like all his rivals there, the Kingpin. And the post-credit scene or the mid-credit scene, I have to admit, was so ridiculous. Is like you just seen what Frank can do, right? You've seen what Frank does. Or if you didn't see it, you know what he does. And he literally is like sweet talking this guard, this cop, I guess, one of the task force. It's not really right to call them cops because when Frank is gunning down these cops, they're not really cops. They're crooked. They're vigilante task force, anti-vigilante task force. So it's kind of like what they did with X-Men 2, with like Stryker's men are different than just the military. So he's kind of got the right to blast them away. So he kind of sweet talks this guy's, oh, well, let me shake your hand. Let me shake your hand. He literally like breaks the guy's arm. And I guess we're led to believe he's going to escape before next season. But it was so stupid. That guy had to be the stupidest guy in the force or whatever. He believed Frank was just going to shake his hand. Come on. So again, now let's get to the violence. This was a big thing. The violence was going to be really big, and we had some really gory, gruesome stuff in the Netflix show. And I'm not a fan of the gory, gruesome stuff, and I will tell you right off the bat that I'm against that for the reasons, like I always say, because the superheroes should be kids viewing. Kids should be allowed to watch these things. Now, they had some grim stuff here. They had Daredevil break a guy's leg that looked really gross. Well, I mean, it was a blink and you miss it thing, really. So, I mean, that was kind of the only thing that was a little squeamish. There was also a lot of shooting and blood spurts and stabbing and blood spurts, but that looks so cartoony, to be honest with you, that I honestly, it didn't even affect me. But I knew this was coming, so I didn't subject my nerves to this. But apparently, there was going to be this great scene of gore and grotesquerie that Kingpin was going to do, and he ends up doing it to the commissioner of police. The commissioner of police, right off the bat, when he first becomes mayor, tells him, I'm not playing ball with you. You're a criminal, and I don't like you, and so I'm retiring. And Fisk is like, well, he blackmails him. In other words, I see your other family or whatever, and if you don't play ball, then you're going to be exposed. So by the end of this, I think her name is Sheila, which is Fisk's like chief of staff, and the commissioner's like going to her and saying, "Look, I got to do something about Fisk. You're gonna have to rally whoever else you can to help me because he's getting out of control, and we got to do something about it." So she ends up thinking on him, which I kind of expected. I don't think she's thinking on him out of loyalty to Fisk, but more out of saving your own skin. You know what I mean? If it comes out that you're trying to go against Fisk, you're going to get the same treatment that this guy got, which was basically to get his head crushed like a walnut. Now, again, I don't see the need for this in a property that was created for kids. I don't think you need this. And again, you could have toned down some of the other violent things, but even those things that, maybe a 10-year-old could see and not be traumatized with, this probably would have traumatized me if I actually saw it. Because I seen like the first couple of frames and I said, I know where this is going. And I really don't know also why they play up this kind of superhuman power with the Kingpin. I mean, this is something you would think the Red Hulk could do. And, there's no story that I know of where he is supposed to be superhuman. You've also got him getting shot in the eye by the Echo in the Hawkeye, and he comes out of that without so much as a scratch. I mean, I really don't understand what they're doing with the Kingpin in that manner. But again, Vincent D'Onofrio is great, and all the actors are great. Charlie Cox is great. Deborah Ann Wall, she looks even more beautiful here than she did in the previous seasons of Netflix. They actually gave her like glam up a little bit, which was nice. And you know, I don't know. I mean, we have the cliffhanger where Matt and Karen Daredevil is sort of looking at this big operation that Kingpin's doing, and he's like, "We need an army." And so everybody's gets excited. They're like, "Oh, you know what this means, don't you? The Defenders are coming back. We're gonna have Spider-Man. We're gonna have maybe Kamala Khan because her father was in the bank episode, and they kind of made a big deal about it. Which I mean, honestly, I don't really feel like they made a big deal about it. People are like, well, they made a big deal about it. Well, yeah, but I mean, you could have used, bank teller number 4 just because they used a guy that was in another Marvel show and name dropped Kamala Khan. I mean, it really wasn't that big of a deal, but all right, maybe we can bring her. And what is it that they actually do? They actually gather together Josie in Josie's bar, Asian female detective that was in the earlier episode with the bank, Cherry, who fans apparently can't stand. I mean, I don't really like either of his DEI hires there, the Kristen or Cherry. And like 3 or 4 good cops that I guess they know are trustworthy. That's kind of what we got. And I just seen today, as a matter of fact, they said, oh, Spider-Man's theme was playing near the end, if you could hear it or something. I mean, they're not going to put Spider-Man in this. We all know that, unfortunately. But if they can bring the Defenders in, I'm pretty sure that would be, something fans want to see, bring them back again. Which, of course, Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, Danny Rand as Iron Fist. I would love to see it. Colleen Wing, Misty Knight. But I always felt like what they should do with that is they should make a Heroes for Hire series. Now, maybe this would be the spin-off vehicle for that, where you put them in it and then you put Luke and Danny together at the end and say, all right, they're going to get their own show, Heroes for Hire. I don't know to what extent Jessica Jones is in that. I don't really know that character that well, but that's probably what they should do. If they're going to do that or not, no one knows at this point, but so there you go. That's about it. That's the cliffhanger that we are waiting patiently for another full year before we get Daredevil Born Again Season 2, or are we going to call it Daredevil Season 5? I think the reason why they're just calling it Born Again originally was because it was going to be its own new thing, soft reboot, just have the same actors but with a different continuity. Then they were like, well, let's just tie it into the old continuity, but it's going to be its own thing, sort of the soft reboot. And then it just turned into Season 4. So again, I like what I've seen this season. I like that there's more action. I like that there's less padding. There's less 15-minute conversations. I like that all the characters are acting like themselves. I like that they're all back, with the exception of Foggy right now. But apparently going forward, we're still going to have Karen and Frank. And of course, Punisher is going to have his own one-shot special, which I don't know what that means. Is that a movie? Is that just like an hour-long episode? That's coming up in the near future. So, I mean, I really feel like, and I would be the first to throw Disney under the bus if I felt like they were, you know, giving us, the crap end with Daredevil. No, they've done a good job at trying to salvage what could have been a terrible prospect of a Disney show where Daredevil was the only thing that was a constant. Maybe Fisk too, I guess, but it remains to be seen how they would have treated him, had it gone on as planned. So again, I'm giving Daredevil Born Again, the first season, I'm gonna give it A minus. I think I'm gonna give it an A minus. I'm honestly gonna give it an A minus. It doesn't reach the levels where it should if they didn't have that long period where they were retooling those episodes. I probably take off half a point as well for the violence that I didn't want to see and I didn't see. And that brings it down to sort of like 4 stars. I think that's probably appropriate. 4 stars, and maybe an 8 out of 10. And again, that's virtually what I gave the other seasons of Daredevil. Maybe a B plus was more for the Netflix version, but again, I think they've improved on the things that I complained about. I wanted to see the radar sense. We still don't get that, but we get to hear him, listening and using the practically the comic book panel of him listening to something and hearing it from across the room, or him running his hand over a piece of paper and reading it. I don't think we've even seen that in Netflix, and we finally seen that here. So I mean, again, some really cool stuff, and I think it's only going to get better from here. I mean, I don't want to, you know, it's best to keep your expectations in check. But I think that going on from here, like I said earlier, this is the preamble. Next season is the good stuff. And I feel bad that we took so long to get to the good stuff, but we're finally going to get to the good stuff. And I can't wait. I can't imagine it'll be a letdown at all. So let me know what you think in the comments below. What did you think about this season? What do you think about next season? What do you want to see? How does this stack up in terms of the other seasons of Daredevil? What did you like? What did you hate about this season? That's kind of what I want to know. And I've kept you here long enough, but I hope you've enjoyed the show. We've got some more reviews coming up. I know Thunderbolts is coming up in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to be sure to see that. So, we've got a big summer coming up as well with Superman, with the Fantastic Four First Steps. Lots of great stuff still to see out there. And of course, I am the only guy that is going to give you the honest appraisal. Like I've always said, I am not going to just say everything's terrible. I'm not just going to say everything's great when it isn't. I've got to be in that space where it's just genuine honesty. That's all I give you guys. And I hope you appreciate it. If you do, like, share, subscribe, check out our link in the description below for the Adventures of Bullets, Bourbon, Private Eye. And until next we meet, this is Johnnie Torch reminding you once again, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.